Hello and welcome to episode 83 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, California moves to ban gas-powered lawn equipment. Blackouts in China lead to more coal production. The IMF calculates fossil fuel subsidies, and the figure that resulted may enrage you. All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. Brian, I am alarmed to tell you that I had a dream about recording the podcast during this past week.
Oh no, was it a nightmare?
Yes, in many ways it was. In fact, it's in some ways it was kind of a disturbing dream. I was recording a podcast exactly as I am now, all happy, and then the next thing I know, I'm asleep, and I'm leaning against one of my headphone pods, and I can sort of hear you saying, "Why are you whispering?" And it's like I just nodded off during the podcast. I don't know what it means. I welcome our viewers to email us at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com to tell us the interpretation of what that dream means. Does it mean we're boring? That I fall asleep? Does it mean I'm getting old and dying? What does it mean?
I mean, it's normal to have a work dream, and, you know, this is your work. The work dream I still have is I used to be a 35 millimeter projectionist at a local cinema, and it was a system that had 20-minute reels. So we had a reel change every 20 minutes, and every once in a while, I still have a dream about that job where I'm missing the 20-minute reel change. It's a nightmare.
Literally.
Literally.
Yeah, my reoccurring dream that I've had for decades is that I don't actually have my degree at university. And that I'm one or two classes short, because I was a terrible student my whole life.
Sure.
And it took me years to get my 4-year degree. I could have been a doctor in that time. Spent a lot of money doing it. And because I screwed up all the time, except for at the end when I finally got my stuff together and did most of my stuff all at the same time. And so that's my dream. So it was such an invasive dream that I had to put my degree up on the wall. Like nobody puts a bachelor degree up on the wall, but I framed it and put it up on the wall. And it was up there till recently. It must have fallen down or something, just to remind me of reality that it did work out, James. All that hard work and money worked out. So,
or if you woke up in a sweat, you could look right at the degree and know that everything was okay.
Sure, something like that. So how are you this week? It's winter is nigh, I'm afraid.
Yes, and I want to start off with a correction. So last week I was talking about how it is illegal in northern Canada, in Churchill, Manitoba, to lock your car doors because people need to escape from polar bears. Well, I heard that on another podcast, a comedy podcast, so I thought I better fact check that. And so I did a bit of Googling, and technically it's not true, but it is the tradition up there to leave your cars unlocked. And they've had public information campaigns encouraging people to keep their doors unlocked so people can escape from polar bears. But it's not technically against the law to lock your car. So I wanted to correct that.
Oh my God, is that myth ever pervasive? Because I Googled it too. I don't know why I Googled it. I think I was Googling it for an image for our TikTok excerpt, which is now bogus. So if you're looking at our TikTok page, just skip over that one. Yeah. But I found it all over the place. That was the case, that there was a law. And there was some major players that had posted that.
Okay, well, maybe my research is wrong then. Maybe you're correct. Maybe it is against the law. I mean,
maybe we need to turn to the listeners. Listeners, if you're there, and I know you are, and you have some inside information, somebody always does, let us know. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com.
So I wanted to ask you about the Volkswagen ID4, because this is Volkswagen's mainstream kind of crossover electric car. It has not yet come to Canada, but finally they're starting to arrive. It's been released in other places and even the U.S., but we have not been able to buy it in Canada up till now. And it's going to be priced somewhat reasonably. And so I just wanted to mention it to you. So the ID4 is coming to Canada. You said last week you weren't really interested in the Nissan Leaf, which, you know, is getting a decent price. So, you need to replace your Toyota Prius sometime in the future. So are you thinking about the Volkswagen ID4? And have you looked at those, prices and stuff?
I've looked at it. They're a bit high for us, and we don't really need an SUV. Of course, it's nice, but our family's actually getting smaller, not larger. we're at that point now with our son off at university, and he might, I mean, I'm sure he'll come on the occasional vacation with us, but for the most part, we're actually becoming a smaller family, not a larger one. And I just don't know that we need that. We're not the type of people who want a crossover because we live in snow country, because we live on a main street that gets plowed hours after it snows. And it's usually, I don't even have winter tires. It's usually not a problem.
Yeah, well, I think the cheaper ID4 will be rear-wheel drive, and that is a bit trickier. But with winter, you'd probably want some winter tires with that.
Okay. Yeah, but that was back, I remember back in the day when I worked for a company that had vans, one rear tire would spin, and you couldn't get out of the parking spaces some days if it was icy or if you were in a slight rut. Say the day before it was warm and you melted a little bit and your tire went into a rut, a slight one, and you could not get out. So that was kind of disgusting. I always hated that. Yeah, I don't like winter tires though. You know what, the thing about hybrids and EVs that I've been driving is that they're heavier. You know, people around here there's a tradition of putting like bags of water softener salt or sand in the back of your pickup truck in order to get traction in the wintertime. And even cars, some people have done that in cars. But with an EV, it's already heavy. Battery's pretty heavy.
No, and the nice thing is, too, when it's super cold here, some people use the trunk of their car as an extra freezer.
Yeah.
My father-in-law drove around for weeks with a frozen turkey in the trunk of his car because he didn't have room. He didn't have room for it in his freezer, so he just left it in the trunk of his car.
That is so us. It's Christmas time. I can see us doing that. It's too warm right now.
And then we ate it, and we referred to it as the trunk turkey.
The trunk turkey. That's not a flattering name for a turkey. Not appetizing. You know, when we clean our deep freezer, we put the stuff outside in the wintertime. You know, if you want to defrost it and get the ice off the edges and make it more efficient, we just put the groceries outside.
We have had a little extra kind of chest outside on the back porch again if the freezer is full. But then, you know, if the temperature gets around zero, that doesn't always work.
Well, here's what I'm going to add to that. If the temperature got even, you know, how I was talking about how snow has melted the snow on my solar panels on the roof at minus 17 on 2 occasions, minus 16 on 1 occasion, I think. Yep. That is a very cold temperature, even for Canadians. And because if everything's just right, and this happened early in January once, and sometimes it doesn't happen, and I don't know why, but the wind has to be calm. I don't know if the sun has more strength on some days, but it would happen at solar noon, like when during noon hour when the sun is at the zenith in the sky. And if it's not windy, the wind plays a major factor, because I think, you know what, I have a little screen around my solar panels. I don't know if you've seen them recently or remember them, but because I'm on like a 2.5-story house in the middle of a bunch of 1-story houses, and it sticks out, they put an extra screen on because I said, man, it gets windy here. And I sort of drilled that into them. It's very windy here. And we had 120 kilometer winds, which they've survived, by the way, but we have not, they're only rated for 110, Brian.
Oh my gosh.
But they went to extra work, the guys at the now defunct solar company that did our solar panels. Solar is thriving. And Brian, I wanted to mention that I saw on the evening news that our first solar farm is online in Saskatchewan, and it's out near Swift Current in the western part of the province where there's already lots of wind. You would have driven by that recently in your Tesla Model 3 trip. Yeah,
saw all the wind turbines, but I guess this is our first official solar farm for our utility. I think it's 10 megawatts, not huge, but
it's small. We need bigger ones, and we need bigger ones pretty soon. And by the way, I found the last reference on BP to carbon footprint. Remember how British Petroleum invented the phrase carbon footprint?
Yeah, to guilt all of us into thinking it's our fault that the world is polluted.
Yes, and to take onuses away from government policy. That, if you think it's the individual and not government policy that's going to change the world, you're wrong, because it's very much the big things that are happening now with banning ICE vehicles on certain dates and things like that. So yeah, it was exactly 2 years ago on October 22nd, 2019. They're still doing it 2 years ago, those bastards. That's all I have to say about that. So Brian, the the Tesla shareholder meeting is always a big interest of Tesla fans, and I know you're an investor and a fan. What did you think of it?
Yeah, well, if you're seriously involved in Tesla and following it closely, there really wasn't all that much new information. Musk gave a nice little presentation, but he tends to repeat himself, and he for the most part, kind of repeated things that we already know. But there was a few little tidbits, and so I'll just go over those quickly. He implied that the Model Y will start production in Texas soon, by the end of the year. This is their new Texas plant factory that's not quite open yet. And he said that they're making enough 4680 cells at the Fremont factory. These are the new form factor batteries, 4680s that Tesla has invented, and they plan to make a zillion of them. He seemed to imply that they're making enough 4680s at Fremont in California, that they'll be shipping those to Texas to put into the Model Y, which implies that the Model Ys coming out of Texas will be the new structural battery pack with the new batteries. So that was exciting news. They've talked before about having a kind of a backup plan of using the older cells, the 2170s, if the 4680s aren't ready. But the thing I got from that is that maybe they're going to use the 2170s at the Berlin factory, which is also about to open, and maybe 4680s in Texas. So none of this is fully confirmed, but that sounded like what he was saying. And if true, that's a fairly big deal.
I'm looking forward to it. It sounds like Berlin's going to open up, possibly spitting out a car this month.
Berlin may be a bit later. I think they're waiting for some regulatory approvals. I think, Berlin is always moving slightly faster. That sounds like maybe Texas is closer. Mm-hmm. Of course, they had the Berlin Gigafest a couple of days ago. So they had a big sort of country fair at the factory in Berlin. So there's been some coverage of that online, and they gave factory tours for everybody. And there's kind of like parts in the factory, like parts of the cars around the factory. But those apparently were made in China and shipped there just kind of as display, or maybe they're using them for testing and whatnot, because they don't have approval yet to actually run the factory. So
right.
The robots were all kind of moving around, but it was, they weren't actually doing anything. It was just a nice kind of display. And apparently it took about 2 hours to do the factory tour. Like, the factory is so enormous. People would go in one door and come out the other 2 hours later. But it all looked fairly impressive. There was a little demonstration of their new precision LED headlights. I thought that was really cool. They had a car set up projecting onto a wall with the headlights. So the headlights now apparently can be programmed to write words on the wall. So the headlights of this Tesla car were saying the words Tesla on the wall in different patterns and moving around and stuff.
I want to write custom messages. Like, hurry up when I'm waiting for my wife to come out of the house, like. Yeah.
I'm assuming that that's what's going to happen. We'll be able to, you can already do that with the horn. Like, you can have custom sounds coming out of the horn. So custom images coming out of the headlights. I think that would be super fun. But yeah, the Berlin Gigafest, it looked pretty interesting. And Tesla really doesn't have a huge presence in Europe right now. A little bit in the UK, a little bit around Europe. But there still aren't that many Tesla cars on the road because they've had to import them all. So, the floodgates are going to open soon. And, Tesla's going to be huge thing in Germany.
I happened to watch Elon's speech just by chance. I wasn't planning on spending the time. I made some notes, if you don't mind. I'll go through some of the things that stood out to me. The Model Y he anticipates being the best selling vehicle in the world, period, by 2024. What do you think about that?
I think it was even sooner, isn't it? Maybe 20.
Well, he said that it'll be the best premium vehicle by 2023, and then the best vehicle period by the year after, or something like that. He thought maybe even by the end of next year.
No, well, once they get the Texas factory and the Berlin factory, the Model Y is their first priority. That's the first thing they're going to get going and ramp up. So, yeah, I believe that. It's the Toyota Corolla is the top selling car right now, and they make something like 1.5 million of those a year. And I absolutely think Tesla will achieve that in a couple of years.
There should be an electric Toyota Corolla, Brian. They made a hybrid one.
Yep.
At least they should have been a plug-in hybrid one. Okay, so solar and energy sections of the company were put on hold basically for 2 years while the Model 3 production ramped up to save the company, because it's such an important thing to get. It was a big deal. We didn't hear about it until afterwards, but that was a life and death situation getting that Model 3 production ramped up, right? That's why we sleep on the factory floor.
So the solar aspect of the company is true. It's kind of lagging behind. They're still not really making any money off of it, but that should change soon.
It's too bad they didn't leave that a little bit more separate, I think. Anyway, moving to Austin, the headquarters, but California is still expanding the workforce there. How do you feel about the moving to Austin?
Well, it doesn't really make a huge difference to me, but it makes sense probably because their biggest factory is going to be in Austin, and they do want to make a political point to leave California. I don't particularly care one way or the other, but they're still expanding operations in California quite a bit, so it's really kind of a nothing story ultimately. And I wanted to mention too, the megapack battery facility. So this is one of the expansions in California, and this was a little bit of new information from Musk's speech, but they have a new factory in California that's going to make the megapacks, which are the very large grid scale battery packs, and they're planning to make 40 gigawatts a year at this new factory of megapacks, and that's up from, they currently make a total of only 4 gigawatt hours of storage, and they're planning to multiply that by 10 times at this new California factory, and that's a big deal. I'm not sure how long it's going to take them to get there, and he did say that the vehicles are the priority for battery cells, so all the battery cells go to vehicles first, and then basically what's left over. But, they're ramping up battery production. Their suppliers are ramping up battery production. So this should all grow fairly quickly.
Now, he was political, like he was kind of pissed off at California politically for shutting them down during COVID and things, and said, I'm moving like a child. My headquarters elsewhere, but he didn't mention that this time. This time he said that they were reaching the limits of their ability to attract talent to the Bay Area due to housing prices, and it's just so clogged up there in the Silicon Valley area where Tesla's at Fremont. And I kind of buy that. Do you? Sort of.
It's definitely part of it, but really just the fact that, Texas is the new factory. So, that's kind of where they want to be. There was a nice article on Clean Technica this week about, Texas is more business friendly from California. And that's another thing that, of course, has been talked about a lot. California tends to have higher taxes and a few more restrictions and rules and everything. But there was a nice article on Clean Technica saying that there is actually states more business friendly than Texas. So they didn't really have to go to Texas. There could have been other places they could have chosen.
There's states more women friendly than Texas. I'll say that right now.
Exactly. Texas is not, if Tesla was run by women, they may not have ended up in Texas. But, Austin it's got a lot of cachet right now. Austin is one of those hip cities in America right now, and that's where they're going. And that's where it's going to be.
The only thing I think about when all these companies do move there, when I say, well, why should you, given the political climate of it's not like it's completely Republican or completely right wing or completely anti-women. It's just that those people are in power locally, and they make the decisions on everyone else's behalf and women's bodies' behalf. And but the more companies that move there, Brian,
and
the more people who will vote against that crap. So
the more chance there is to change it. As the power of Austin grows, it'll definitely shift more to the left, because Austin is very much a left-leaning city.
Unless they try to gerrymander Austin right out of the state. Solar roof is slow. Sounds like retrofitting is difficult, and they prefer new builds. So that's been a hassle, it sounds like. They just hinted at that. They want to get to the point where people will demand solar roofs when shopping for a new house, so with a battery. So they'll say, well, this house that you're trying to sell me in this new subdivision, does it have a new solar roof? Does it have a solar roof with a battery or not? Or does Harry's building company is the one I'm going to go with? So they want people to be demanding that, just like you would demand cruise control on a car or some of the new safety features that they have now, like pedestrian collision warning.
Yeah, and they probably should have focused on new builds from the beginning, because it is more difficult to retrofit the solar roof tiles to older houses. So they should absolutely focus on new builds as much as possible.
In Elon's estimation, electrified transportation will double the demand for electricity.
In Canada, for sure, because the home heating is going to use so much. I think Tony Seba has maybe used the figure 4 times as much electricity. He keeps saying it's not going to be a problem because solar, wind, and batteries are cheap and plentiful, and we can put up lots of extra ones. But yeah, I've certainly seen it with my own house. My own electricity bills have gone up, 20-30% since I got an electric car.
But 20-30% is like $20 or $30, isn't it? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, it's still, cheaper than buying gasoline, especially at the current prices.
It bugs me, and I keep seeing this online and with people I talk to. I was on a talk radio show once, and an elderly woman called in and said, how much is my electricity bill going to go up? And I said, well, maybe $28 is the average in Canada. She said, oh, no, I don't want that. And I said, but what if you save $150 a month? Well, I don't want my electricity bill to go up.
Yeah.
It's such stubborn, stupid thinking, and it's pervasive. Elon stayed, the other thing I found about the Tesla earnings call was that Elon stayed in a blacked out house in Austin during the winter storm blackout last year. So he was there stuck in the dark at a friend's house.
And that must have really annoyed him because I'm sure,
I can't imagine the number of times he said to the person, why didn't you have a Tesla solar roof? Or at
You're
the very
my friend.
least,
you should have just got a Powerwall.
And obviously the guy was rich. He's not staying at a love shack somewhere with 20 square feet. I mean, this guy's in a mansion only kind of guy. So they also said they had trouble getting ships. Like there's a shortage of ships. This whole supply chain, it's not just the chips, it's the ships themselves. Yeah. Even the ones that got stuck in the Suez Canal backed things up to this day. Like everything. The thing that we're learning about the pandemic and everything is that the supply chain is by the minute. It's everything exactly as you needed. And now that things have disrupted that, well, it's completely out of whack, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they said that my big takeaway, I think, is that they got too busy with the X and the S and the 3 and the Y to get going on the Cybertruck or Semi or Roadster anytime soon. So I still have time to win the lottery. My son, I've warned him against lotteries. What did he do? He went to his old grocery store on the weekend where he used to work during the summer, and he wanted to see if they'd ID him because he just turned 18. So he bought a lottery ticket, and he won $20, $4 lotteries. His first time. That's the worst thing that can happen to a gambler is to win early on.
No, but you got to teach him to invest some money every month because he's young, and that's a guaranteed lottery win. If he invests every month, by the time he's 50, it's a guaranteed lottery win.
And I know people who have spent money on the lottery their whole life, not on a dime, or every time they win, they invested in more tickets, and it's at least one lottery win, at least $1 million lottery win that they've spent in their lifetime.
So the last thing I wanted to mention about the Tesla shareholder meeting is that Elon did mention fusion briefly, and this is sort of like what you were talking about earlier. Solar, wind, and batteries is all we need, but people are still working on things like fusion energy, which has the potential to be, a never-ending fuel source without too many downsides. But yeah, somebody asked him about fusion, and he said that, well, it's interesting, and he thinks it's doable, but we have a big fusion reactor in the sky called the sun, and then he kind of repeated those, which is free, and those stats that we've heard before. You could power the entire United States with 200 square miles of solar panels and only 1 square mile of batteries, and that would power the entire United States. So it's really interesting that people are working on things like fusion. We're not going to need it.
This is the Clean Energy Show.
So, California has introduced some new legislation to ban gas-powered lawn equipment. And we've talked about this on before. And honestly, I thought it was maybe even already illegal in parts of California and maybe even in certain cities or something like this. But anyway, it's a new ban by around 2024 or possibly sooner when the regulators determine it is feasible. But these little small gas-powered devices, which are often lawnmowers or leaf blowers, in addition to being insanely loud and disruptive, they are huge polluters, much more than their size would suggest. So this is a stat I think we've even said on the show before. A gas-powered leaf blower blowing for 1 hour emits the same amount of pollution as driving a 2017 Toyota Camry from Los Angeles to Denver, which is 1,100 miles. Just 1 hour. It's like driving 1,100 miles or 1,700 kilometers.
That's absolutely incredible. I mean, obviously, it's not going to solve the climate crisis alone, but it's amazing. I think people would be shocked. I think they should put that sign up on the lawnmower department at Home Depot, because I don't think most people know that, or have a public service ad to just encourage that. Because you talk about the little things that we can do. I mean, we can turn out the lights, we can, turn down the temperature of our fridge, but that's a pretty big pollution saver. That's pretty simple. Just purchase something different next time.
And it makes sense if you're ever around one. If you're near a lawnmower, if you're near a leaf blower that's burning gas, they smell horrible. And that's because they emit a ton of pollution.
Yeah. And I'm getting too old to pull the ripcord on those things.
And that's the other problem.
I'll probably
a pain that way
disjoint my arm or something, or throw an elbow out. So that's very interesting news, Brian. Let's get to the EV of the week. I've got an exciting EV of the week for us this week, Brian. It's from China. It is. I wanted to talk about it because I watched a review on it. It's got some weird features, weird features that demented versions of you and I would really enjoy, and that is a film projector option with a screen. Now I've seen the screen. It's like a dollar store blind. It's really cheap and flimsy, but it sort of attaches to the front of the car, and it's incredibly cheap. I hope they don't charge much for it. But it comes down, and the seats recline all the way, and you have an optional bed with a pump that fills it up and fills up all the spaces nicely, and you can just sleep in the car and watch movies. I think two people can, maybe two people and a kid. That's weird. But what I really like about it, and this is, by the way, the Xpeng P5. It's spelled Xpeng, or is it Xpeng? Xpeng P5. Pardon me. That's what it is. It's a car, but the big thing about this, Brian, is it's going to be less than $25,000 after incentives, and
in China.
But the incentives in China aren't that great. In fact, they might even be better in some states in the United States than they are in China as a whole. But it comes with a fridge. You know how you have those little arms that come down between the two back seats in cars with drink holders on them? Well, when you flip that down on this baby, there is a fridge.
Love it.
It's lit up blue, and there's bottles of stuff in there. And an electric car, and it's got a solar panel on the roof, too, that gives it a kilowatt hour a day, which is pretty decent, actually.
On a sunny day, probably.
The reviewers actually got that. I don't know if it was a really good sunny day or not, but that's what they got in the United. I think somewhere in the Shanghai region or Beijing, or was it Beijing? It's interesting because solar, I imagine, is less in those polluted cities, so that's why I wonder if there might actually be more if we had one over here, because that's what the reviewer got. I like the idea of a fridge in a car. Okay, am I wrong? Is that too much? Did you have any desire for something like that?
Well, it wouldn't be a huge priority for me, but I know you love your chilled beverages.
Yes, I'm drinking one right now.
Perfect for you. Yeah.
The thing is, you could keep it running in an electric car all the time, right? If you were decadent enough, you could just have, anytime you want chilled water, there's one there for you. You just throw some bottled water in there or some bottles of water, and it's there for you all the time, cold.
I remember hearing a story about Elvis. You always hear these weird stories about eccentric things about Elvis, and he had some kind of a Cadillac limousine that had a super refrigerator in it that could make ice cubes in like 3 minutes or something.
Oh, an ice cube maker. Now I'm jealous of Elvis, because that'll be my next step.
You need a fridge. You need an ice maker too, really.
All I'm asking, Brian, is I've seen one in a glove box once, actually, which I was very jealous of. And that was recent times in a luxury Cadillac or something. And all I want is my console to have a little unit, a little place down there, like your console between the front seats. You open it up and you store garbage in there or whatever. People usually don't store anything good in there. Make it refrigerated. Make it small and refrigerated. But this is also a freezer. You can program it on your big screen Tesla-like display on the dash to be a freezer as well. Ice cream anytime you want. You want to have ice cream in the car, on the go, on standby. It makes me think that, if I was an Uber driver, you could have bottled water at the back and just say, complimentary water. You get 5 stars every time.
Oh, yeah. That would be huge for Uber. Absolutely.
And in China, as we found out with Tesla, that there's a lot of cars that are going to people who are getting chauffeured. So if you're chauffeuring people in a car who owns the car, then that's really nice feature to have. I thought it was cool. Some of these things are ridiculous. The movie projector, of course, I can't imagine anyone. I can imagine camping in the car, but the movie projector is a bit much.
Well, I do love a drive-in movie, and we still have a couple of those drive-in movie theaters around here.
Maybe that's what Tesla could do with their headlights. They could turn it into a movie projector one day.
Perhaps.
And just project off the side of a building or something. 6 grades of the car available. The biggest grade is trim level, if you want, in North American terms. 71.4 kilowatt hour battery usable, and that'll give you 600 kilometers of range, or 373 miles on the NEDC. So that's pretty good. The minimum it'll give you is 460 NEDC. I wonder if that would translate into something similar to your car in real world.
Yeah, I think that would be more like closer to 400 in reality.
Right. So that's pretty decent that's the $25,000 version of it. We'll see it in Europe and Norway first because they're selling their other cars there, and it'll be a while. But Chinese cars are coming, people. People are going to have big questions about Chinese cars, but that's our EV of the week. Brian, you wanted to talk about fossil fuel subsidies.
Well, I don't really want to talk about it because it's super depressing, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has released a study, and we've heard figures similar to this before, about how much the fossil fuel industry is being subsidized around the world. And the figure that they came up with was $11 million every single minute. That's how much fossil fuels are being subsidized.
By you and I.
This is always difficult. Yeah, this is always difficult to calculate. But 8% of that is cutting of fuel prices. So that's a direct subsidy, 8%. And then another 6% in tax rebates or tax cuts. So 14% of that is a absolute direct subsidy. So a couple of $1 million per minute of direct subsidies. And those are the easiest ones that we could get rid of. The rest of the subsidy is a bit harder to calculate it because it's essentially the cost of dumping garbage and pollution into the air and not taking care of it.
Right.
And that makes up the rest of the subsidy. So as we know, in most places on Earth, you can dump as much garbage into the air as you want, and you don't have to pay for that privilege. You have to pay to take your garbage to the garbage dump in our city and in most cities. But most places, they don't charge you for dumping your garbage into the air. And that makes none of this math work properly. If you don't have to actually pay for the true cost of polluting the entire Earth, the whole economic argument of fossil fuels is thrown out of whack. But, we could start with getting rid of those direct subsidies of, a couple of $1 million per minute, direct subsidies to fossil fuels. And that's super depressing.
It is super depressing, and we are a show of optimism. But I think that more and more people are getting it, though, and they're demanding different things cutting of reducing of fossil fuel subsidies is something that's talked about politically now a lot on everybody who's centrist and left, I guess. So Yeah, I have some optimism about that, don't you? That politically things are changing, that people are going to demand that. They're kind of mad at that now.
Well, if we weren't optimistic, I don't think we'd be doing this podcast. Certainly the goal is by 2030, this will be a much different world.
Wouldn't it be depressing to do a depressing podcast every week that wasn't good news? That's part of the things that keep us coming to the mic every week, isn't it?
It really is genuinely true. I do expect all of this stuff to be better by 2030, that, most things will be electrified by 2030. As we've said, the climate has already changed, so we're not exactly going to be reversing certain trends by 2030, but things are looking good.
So coming up later in the show is the lightning round, where we'll skim through the headlines and do all kinds of things really quickly. Let's get to some feedback, Brian. I love feedback. We have just a tinge of feedback this week. This is from my nephew on Twitter, Matthew Whittingham in Winnipeg. Hello, Matthew. I hope you're not listening. Hate it when my family listens. Hate it when my friends listen. I just want you people to be strangers. He says he learned about the tax that our government here in Saskatchewan, Canada, has put on electric vehicles, even when there was only 400 of them. And he said only psychopaths can draft such a law. And I thought this was something I read on the Beaverton, but no, this is real. It is bizarre, isn't it? It was something that you would expect, but no, they actually did it.
Yeah, it's depressing. Is that all the depressing news out of the way now?
Yeah, it's all out of the way, Brian. Let's move on.
All right, one last depressing news story.
No.
So there's been these blackouts in China. I don't know. I think it basically comes from supply and demand being all screwed up because of the pandemic, that demand for a lot of things like power went way down in the pandemic. Now it's kind of coming up, and we're seeing really supply chain issues in a lot of places. The UK is having shortages and price spikes. And in China, they've been having blackouts. They cannot make enough electricity in China. And this is in spite of expanding as quickly as they can. But yeah, unfortunately, they've had to increase their output of coal to kind of combat these blackouts. But it's hopefully going to be under control soon, but it is going to possibly affect players like, Tesla or Apple, these big tech companies. They're also susceptible to these blackouts and power shortages in China. So sadly, more coal for at least the short term in China.
Yeah, I had a headline here that says coal futures are hitting a record high in China because floods are worsening the energy crisis. They're flooding some actual coal production facilities. So, ironic somehow. Well, let's get to the lightning round. Brian, I've got a fat one for you this week. So let's get going. There's no time to waste. GM announces the reveal of the Silverado and GMC Sierra E. That is the Silverado E, not the Ford F-150 Lightning, but just add an E to the end of their pickup trucks. And they're going to reveal them at the Consumer Electronics Show with four-wheel steering. And which is, by the way, not working out very well for some people. Rivian's taking it off the shelf right now. And it'll have a glass roof like everyone else. Excited, curious, wait and see.
Yeah, yet another electric pickup truck announced. This is obviously a huge segment in America, so super important for the EV future.
Tesla's upcoming factory in Germany will be able to produce one car body every 45 seconds.
That's fast.
First cars perhaps coming soon. So that is pretty impressive. And we mentioned last week that the Volkswagen people were getting kind of scared about their productivity going down, right?
Yeah, so Volkswagen apparently had a meeting. They figured out that Tesla can make a car in about 10 hours, and it takes Volkswagen about 30 hours to make the same car. And this is with Tesla's old technology. With their new factories, we're expecting everything to go faster. So if they can already make a car in 8 hours, expect that to drop with the new factories.
A Canadian oil export pipeline to the U.S. just opened with little fanfare. The Enbridge Line 3 didn't generate nearly as much attention as the Keystone XL, which was killed by various sources, various people, the United States, Joe Biden, but added more than half of the export capacity to the United States from Canada than the Keystone XL would have. So it's half a Keystone, and nobody talked about it.
No, this is the first I'm hearing of it, so I'm kind of embarrassed. But it's weird how that happens, that some things catch the zeitgeist and some things don't.
Well, the Line 5, which goes through Michigan's waterways, and the governor there wants to shut it down and cause major problems for Canada, is beginning a lot of the headlines. But, you know, as political people, the trolls on Twitter decide what's news and what's not, and they negative sell. So this being a positive thing for the oil and gas industry, I guess, who cares, right? It's not going to get a lot of attention. Tesla removed the controversial non-disclosure agreement in its latest full self-driving beta release. Any thoughts?
No real thoughts, but yeah, 10.2 is out, the latest FSD beta. I watched one video on YouTube, and it seemed like more of the same. It's in many ways amazing, and then in other ways, you know, the human driver still has to take over.
Google Flights will start showing people the carbon footprint of their flights. Will you look at your own carbon footprint, and will that affect you, Brian Stockton?
I'm very interested in that, although I haven't taken a flight in, 4 or 5 years now. The pandemic certainly adding to that, but I hadn't flown a couple of years before that. But it goes back to your point of earlier. They should put up a sign, you know, at the hardware store when you buy a lawnmower that it's like driving a Toyota Corolla for 1,000 miles.
Last year, 9 out of 10 cars sold at Volvo's Reading dealership west of London were combustion vehicles. 9 out of 10, 90%. Today, a year later, almost half have either a plug-in hybrid or fully electric battery vehicles. That's a big change in 1 year, and baby, it's coming, and it's going to come fast when it happens.
And it's pronounced Reading, so just say the word Reading right now.
Didn't I say Reading?
No, you said Reading.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually do know the word Reading, because there's a lot of reasons for that. World War II stories are just one of them. My dad was stationed near there in World War II, so I was reading his letters a couple of years ago. And reading the Reading letters. Renewable power generation costs in 2020 have been figured out, and here they are. Concentrating solar power, which I don't care for, is down 16%. That's where you have all these mirrors are in a big circle, concentric circles, and all pointed at a tower and boil a fluid in that tower. Don't care for that, because I don't know that it's the most efficient or best way to go, but it's down 16%.
This is the costs of that.
The cost of it, yeah, per kilowatt hour that it will produce in its lifetime when you're building new facilities, which I think they're doing less of. It probably makes a lot more sense in some climates. Certainly failed in Alberta when they tried one in Medicine Hat a few years ago, and it snowed on the panels and didn't work in winter very well. That you can count on, but PV works. I can tell you, as a person who has PV on his roof for 4 years in a very cold climate, it works. And onshore wind is down 13%. Offshore wind is down 9%. And solar photovoltaics is down 7%. That is year over year over 2019. And considering that there's a bit of a slowdown in some sectors because of the pandemic.
And we know that we don't have the stat, but we know that the cost of batteries is dropping every year as well.
Yes, the batteries was not included in that, but you can look for maybe 18% year over year on that. But on the other hand, there's going to be some years where it might stay the same or go up because of supply shortages. And
lots of
certainly
demand.
Could be in one of those right now. Google is cracking down on digital ads that promote the idea that climate change is a hoax. That's a good thing. A little late, Google. Thank you. They're hoping to limit revenue for climate change deniers and stop the spread of misinformation on its platforms.
Yeah, that's great.
Elon Musk says it will take 30 to 40 years to replace all the cars in the world, the current fleet. And I think, Brian, and this is only theoretical, but I think at some point we will actually ban ICE vehicles, like old ones. They'll say, okay, you've got 5 years to get an EV.
Yep.
And boy, when that happens, they're not going to be worth anything at all. Or when even you get anywhere near that, they're not going to be worth it.
No, and I can certainly see people being upset about that. But this sort of goes back to what we were talking about like last week or the week before about, maybe plug-in hybrids are the kind of bridge technology that will take us to fully electric. But this is why I think that's not the answer, because it isn't just new cars being sold that we have to worry about. It's replacing the fleet. And if we're replacing some of the fleet with plug-in hybrids that still have a gas engine, that's not going to help the ultimate goal of getting rid of the entire fleet.
Yes. And I think that what would probably happen is, and based on what's happening now in the ICE vehicle bans, is that there'll be a buffer that they'll say, okay, straight gas vehicles banned 5 years. We'll give you 8 years to get rid of the plug-in hybrids, or 10 or whatever. That's just my guess, but that's something to think about because that's coming eventually.
Or to keep your old, hot rod Mustang running, you'll pay an extra, tax or something to,
Yeah, for sure. And it will be there. Not a problem. I mean, there's always going to be those old hot rods around, just like there's steam engines around now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fine. And it'll certainly be a very nostalgic. If I lived long enough, I think 20 years from now, I'll be very nostalgic to get a combustion vehicle. But, oh, yeah, when I was a kid, I used to ride one of these. Yeah. When I was a middle-aged man, I could walk without a cane. More than 30 countries are joining a U.S. pledge to slash methane emissions. That is a headline that is just out today. Methane is the second largest driver of global warming after carbon dioxide emissions. And scientists say the promised cuts could help avert the worst consequences of climate change. Moving on, to be quick, Rivian focuses their manufacturing of their trucks on Amazon delivery van, apparently, over the RT1 electric truck. So they have that $100,000 or 100,000 unit order for Amazon, which is great. Yep. But it sounds like it's going to take trucks out of consumers' hands for the first while, till they can really ramp up. A new Canadian study suggests electricity demand will grow by 51% by 2050. That's a lot smaller than the 3x growth that we were talking about earlier,
No,
right?
I think it's going to be more like 150%, 200, 300%. We'll see.
GM claims Ultra Cruise, that is their self-driving technology, will go hands-free in 95% of scenarios, and it is due in 2023. Do you have any GM Cruise is one of the bigger self-driving platforms, one of the big three. So
yeah, there's lots of pretty decent driver assist systems out there, and I think GM's is decent. 2023 is they got a couple of years to work on that, so that's probably doable.
Kawasaki, the motorcycle maker, has announced that all of its motorcycles will go electric by 2035. That's a bit more than 10 years, 13 years.
Yeah, they should probably do it sooner than that, but okay, it's a start.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, though, to have the energy density for a good motorcycle to meet all demands, but I suspect it'll be quite easy after 2020 or 2030, I think that. And then everyone will demand one because, maybe not. Maybe not, because actually that's a pretty big thing when you think about how people really like the motorcycle noise.
Yeah.
The riders really like the noise. So that's actually interesting that they would commit to that already, and because it could turn people off their brand, especially in the early stages. Bloomberg says solar installations globally will be up 23% this year. That's pretty good. Things are going. Things are moving.
That's huge.
And finally, solar panels are helping French winemakers adapt to climate change. Solar panels, solar farms, because they are insulating from extreme cold somehow. I don't know how that works. And heat waves. I know how that works. It reflects some of the heat. Maybe there's not a lot of solar mass in solar panels, a lot of thermal mass in solar panels. They're aluminum and thin and glassy. So I don't see how that works, but maybe the concrete on the ground warms up like the foundation.
What's that term you learned for when you have solar panels in a farm?
Agrivoltaics.
Agrivoltaics, yes. So it sounds like there is potential for something like that in wine growing. I mean, certainly in Canada, the solar panels could help keep the frost off of your grapes if frost is an issue.
Believe me, there's been a frost in my grapes quite a bit lately. They can rotate to allow more light on overcast days onto the crops. So if it's overcast, they can shade them on the sunnier days. This is adjusting to specific crops. And basically, they're moving from a Mediterranean to a semi-arid climate, where the French grape winemakers are. 30 years ago, 32 Celsius was extreme, and now 40 degrees is common. So this is one way to deal with it.
Yeah, that's a big deal because, of course, the climate for wine growing is super important because it affects everything about the taste of the wine. So if you're a serious winemaker in France, where the serious winemakers are, this seems like a great way to maybe, mitigate some of those effects of climate change and be able to tweak your crop to, the new conditions. That sounds great.
Well, I hope to be a serious wine drinker one day, Brian. That's our time for this week. Consider rating and reviewing our show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you every week with the latest in clean energy news. Bye for now.
See you next week.